Part 85. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji-Sheng Chang. Chapter 841. Almost in this breath, the ethereal air around him completely exploded in an instant. The Imperial Sword condensed some of its own sword energy and then condensed into the sword energy that filled the sky. I fell into your hands directly at the beginning. There was no other reason than that I just wanted to rely on your luck and opportunity to come to this small world. I have been searching for this small world for thousands of years. Now, I can't find it. I thought that under your leadership, I finally got in. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what the Imperial Sword said, his whole expression suddenly turned gloomy. At this time, his fists clenched and the murderous aura in his body became even more intense. It is becoming more and more obvious. I didn't expect that your purpose would be this. The sword spirit of the Imperial Sword laughed loudly, and then looked back and forth at Lin Yu. His eyes were full of heat. After a moment, he just shook his head. Actually, even I have to admit that you are indeed somewhat capable, but so what? Even if you are capable, in my eyes you are just a tool. Now you have it has no use value at all, you can go die. Lin Yu's expression turned cold, and then a faint aura appeared on his body. At this time, he completely wrapped the aura around the sword spirit of the Imperial Sword. Really? But considering the current situation, you may not be able to defeat me. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he made a hand seal with his hands, and then he saw the ball of vast air, which instantly rose up to the sky. Then he saw the ball of vast air condensed into one. Almost at this moment, that aura of awe-inspiring energy was completely directed toward the sword spirit of the Imperial Sword and suddenly enveloped it. After the sword spirit of the Imperial Sword saw this scene, his face instantly turned ugly. He suddenly pulled away one after another, and after taking several steps back, it was regarded as reluctant. Stand firm. The sword spirit of the Imperial Sword was breathing heavily like this, with a slightly gloomy look on his face. How is that possible? Although your strength is not weak, it shouldn't be so strong. At this time, Lin Yu also had an indifferent sneer at the corner of his mouth, and the next second he saw him shaking his head like this. My strength and weakness are beyond your imagination. Dust will return to dust, dust will return to dust. It's time for everything to end. It's time for you to die obediently now. A sneer appeared at the corner of Lin Yu's mouth. Then I saw him completely releasing the rich aura from his body. Waiting for the next second, the thick energy suddenly changed so completely that it began to explode crazily around the sword spirit of the Imperial Sword. After the sword spirit of the Imperial Sword saw this scene, he was stunned for a moment. He desperately wanted to control the roiling power. But at this time, the sword spirit of the Imperial Sword could not control this power no matter how hard it tried. At this time, he began to realize that he had been scheming against Lin Yu, but in the end it was Lin Yu who had been scheming against him. After the sword spirit of the Imperial Sword thought of this, a faint bitter smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and his whole expression was full of unwillingness. At this time, it was as if he suddenly remembered something. He just turned his head and glanced back and forth towards Lin Yu, and a faint sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. Ha ha ha, it's interesting. It's really interesting. Although you have the upper hand now, but so what, that wind chime will never come back. As soon as the Emperor's Sword finished speaking, Lin Yu's eyes clearly showed a bit of unwillingness, and at this time, he let out an angry roar from his mouth. What did you say? I'm going to kill you. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he saw a light blue aura lingering around him. That light blue aura was completely condensed almost at that moment. And the sword spirit of the Imperial Sword, after seeing Lin Yu being so angry, instantly shot up into the sky through Lin Yu's absent-mindedness, and disappeared completely without a trace in the next second. Trace. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he couldn't help but take a deep breath, and then he calmed down his mood. After a while, he just sat paralyzed on the ground. The world is unpredictable and the past is uncertain. How could the world be like this? But at this moment, Lin Yu seemed to have suddenly understood something. At this moment, he saw a golden light falling from the sky and hitting Lin Yu. Waiting for the next second, you can see the golden light on Lin Yu's body, the power of the laws of witchcraft, and the power of this small world, instantly submerged into Lin Yu's body. Just a moment later, Lin Yu came back to his senses in an instant. He suddenly opened his eyes, and there was a kind of indifference in his eyes. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, everything must be over, everything must be over. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he suddenly stepped forward and a vast force burst out from his body in an instant. The vast breath forced everyone to retreat madly at that moment. At this time, Lin Yu suddenly opened his eyes, and the next second, others saw a light golden light in his eyes. After a moment, a faint bitter smile appeared on the corner of Lin Yu's mouth, and he heard him say helplessly, "It's been a long time since I left, and now it's time to go back." After Lin Yu finished speaking, his mind moved, and he disappeared in the next second, but in just a moment, Lin Yu turned back completely. Lin Yu returned to the forest again, and at this moment, his mind moved, but in just a moment, he came directly to Bai Binjiao's side. At this time, Bai Binjiao had also fallen into a coma. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Chang. Chapter 842. Almost at that moment, the vast energy began to completely release from Lin Yu's body. Lin Yu's eyes closed slightly, and then he let out a roar. Ah! The next second, I saw the surrounding woods, and almost in that instant, they turned into snake shadows all over the sky. Those snakes are as thick as these ancient trees. After Bai Binjiao came back to her senses and saw this scene, she couldn't help but be stunned for a while. At this time, Bai Binjiao's eyes were staring at Lin Yu, and the expression on her face was a little more frightened. How is that possible? Weren't we in the forest before? Why are we now in this ghost place? Bai Binjiao's voice even trembled slightly when he spoke. He turned his head and stared directly at Lin Yu, his eyes full of confusion. When Lin Yu saw this scene, a helpless smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, and then he pointed forward. We have indeed been here before. As for why we have always seen forests, there is no other reason, but it is just because these guys deliberately used tricks. Bai Binjiao nodded gently. At this time, Bai Binjiao looked around and saw that Lu Changqing and others had all disappeared without a trace. Bai Binjiao turned her head and glanced at Lin Yu, and then asked in a low voice. Where are Lu Changqing and the others? Why can't I see them now? A bitter smile appeared at the corner of Lin Yu's mouth, and then he couldn't help but shook his head helplessly. Hey, is it possible that you still don't know the reason for this? After Bai Binjiao heard what Lin Yu said, she couldn't help but cover her mouth. Her eyes were fixed on Lin Yu's body, and then she moved towards and took several steps back. How is that possible? Do you mean? Bai Binjiao's voice even trembled slightly. At this time, Lin Yu nodded firmly after hearing what Bai Binjiao said. That's right, they have indeed been swallowed by all the snake monsters from before. And at this moment, not far away, a giant python covered with green snakes slowly raised its head. At this time, they just felt that the ground around them started to tremble violently. Lin Yu grabbed Bai Binjiao's slender waist, and then suddenly jumped up. A moment later, he was so smart in the void. At this time, Lin Yu's face flashed with a bit of gloom. It seems like you have made up your mind this time. Lin Yu's voice was slightly hoarse. At this time, his face was filled with a gloomy look. At this moment, he saw the giant python. After hearing what Lin Yu said, he couldn't help but smile coldly. Ha ha ha, Now that you little guy knows my purpose, if you can't help but catch me now, I can give you a happy death. If not, I will kill you bit by myself. Pay taxes on every bone in your body. The Lord of 10,000 Snakes was talking leisurely at this time, with a completely indifferent expression on his face, and a little bit of murderous aura emerging from his body. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Lord 10,000 Snakes said, he couldn't help but snorted coldly, and then suddenly took a step forward. Humph, if you want to make me surrender without mercy, I'm afraid you don't have the qualifications yet. Lin Yu completely released his murderous aura almost at this moment, and then he saw Lin Yu, and his whole expression was filled with a kind of indifference. Meaning. After the 10,000 Snakes Lord heard what Lin Yu said, a faint sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. His eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and then his murderous aura almost disappeared. It was at that moment that he was completely released. Little guy, are you sure I really don't have this qualification? At this time, after Lin Yu saw the 10,000 Snake Spirit Master in front of him like this, he forcibly calmed down his mind. After seeing this scene, Bai Binjiao's face turned pale instantly. She turned her head, her eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and her voice even sounded slightly at that moment a little trembling. Can this big guy really be able to deal with this big guy? Bai Binjiao's voice was slightly hoarse. After Lin Yu heard what Bai Binjiao said, he just rubbed Bai Binjiao's little head gently, and then said half-jokingly, "If I can't handle it, are you willing to die with me?" Lin Yu's eyes were staring straight at Bai Binjiao, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. When Bai Binjiao heard Lin Yu's words, a strange color flashed across her face, and she nodded. "Of course, it's just life and death, it's nothing at all." Bai Binjiao just said this softly, which obviously means that he is ready to die with Lin Yu at this time, and there is a bit of determination in her eyes. At this time, I don't know why Lin Yu suddenly remembered the girl who walked with him in the desert for dozens of days. Although everything in it was just a dream, Lin Yu still felt helpless at this time. A faint smile appeared on the corner of Lin Yu's mouth, and then he shook his head helplessly. Alas, the world is unpredictable, and life is unpredictable. It can't be explained. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he summoned the space-time beast and the fire Kirin red snake yellow sand beast to his front. At this time, Lin Yu was like a king looking down from a high place. He just glanced at the three beasts. "Today is the day for you to become a god king." After hearing what Lin Yu said, the fire Kirin, the space-time beast, and Huangsha, their pupils suddenly expanded, and their eyes and eyebrows were full of surprise. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 843. But before they could even utter a word from his mouth, they saw Lin Yu clasping his hands and reciting a curse, and then directly biting off the tip of his tongue. 3 lines of faint blood disappeared into their minds in an instant. But it only lasted for a moment, and then I saw a pale golden light flashing from the 3 beasts. The pale golden light rose into the sky, went straight up to the 9 heavens, and landed in the 9 places. So that no one even dared to look at him. At this time, Lin Yu had such a condescending expression, with a kind of indifference on his face, and the murderous aura in his body was completely released almost at this moment. "Now, it's the day you die." After hearing what Lin Yu said, Lord 10,000 Snakes added Lin Yu's previous methods. At this time, Lin Yu suddenly flew forward, and then immediately released his momentum completely at that moment. A turbid breath in the void almost appeared here. In an instant, he was completely released. Then he saw a Taoxian aura nearby, rising into the sky in an instant, but with just one breath, the vast aura around him was hovering in the sky in an instant. In the void, A trace of gloomy energy was completely released almost at this moment. That group of auras was so completely frozen almost in such an instant, and the big snake in the void was so completely crushed. The Lord of 10,000 Snakes let out a painful scream, and then in the next second, you could see the vast air surrounding him, completely released in an instant. At this time, after seeing this scene, Lin Yu's face couldn't help but freeze. It looks like you may be in trouble this time. Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the Lord of 10,000 Snakes, and then he snorted coldly, his expression full of gloom. At this time, after Lord 10,000 Snakes heard what Lin Yu said, a strong murderous intention rushed out almost at this moment, and the gloomy aura spread instantly. Boy, do you think you've got me now? I'm telling you, there's no way I'm going to make you pay for this. After Lord 10,000 Snakes finished speaking, he immediately changed his body in the next second. But in just a blink of an eye, the Wan Snake Lord became Governor Wan Zhang. At this time, the Wan Snake Lord's expression was full of indifference, and then he saw countless snake heads, almost like it condensed at this moment. Almost in this breath, just a moment, the power around them completely forced everyone back at this moment. The 10,000 Snake Lords opened their bloody mouths and at the same time bit towards Lin Yu like crazy. At this time, Lin Yu also stepped back one after another. After taking several steps back, he barely managed to stand firm. At this time, his face turned slightly pale, and then he was breathing heavily, and there was a look of disbelief in the corners of his eyes and brows. How is it possible? Is this the strength of the God King realm? It is indeed a bit powerful, but it's a pity that after meeting me, it was still a little bit behind. After Lin Yu finished speaking, a faint sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth, and then he saw Lin Yu making hand gestures with his hands and chanting a mantra. A vast air rose from the sky in an instant, straight up to the sky, and landed on the sky. Among the 9 places. But just between those exhalations and inhalations, the surrounding air even began to solidify. In a moment, the scene and the vast aura condensed into one in an instant. Thousands of lights and shadows shot out of the sky, and the surrounding space even felt slightly distorted at that moment. Lin Yu used his hands, Wei Wei used both hands to stop reciting the incantation, and then he saw waves of vast aura around that area, and the masses of ethereal auras spontaneously emerged, but it was only a momentary scene, it made everyone's hearts freeze. A group of gloomy auras began to gather together little by little, but just after that moment, they saw the groups of cold auras unite into one in an instant. In just a moment, Lin Yu gathered all the surrounding space into one place. The clusters of auras suddenly exploded completely, and then he saw an indifferent sneer appeared at the corner of Lin Yu's mouth, and he just snorted coldly. Humph, I will kill you no matter what today. At this time, Lin Yu had compressed that area of space together. At this moment, he saw an indifferent sneer on the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were fixed on the Lord of 10,000 Snakes. And then an angry roar came out of his mouth. Give it to me. Lin Yu had just finished speaking, and then he saw that this area of space was actually twisted into a ball by Lin Yu. After this area of space was distorted, Lin Yu's expression began to gradually become more evident. An angry roar came out of his mouth, it's not enough, continue to condense. The next second, I saw the vast air around me twisted into a ball, and then a blood mist exploded. The body of the 10,000 Snake Spirit Lord was completely torn apart at this moment. At this moment, I saw the 3 beasts behind Lin Yu, the Space-Time Beast, the Scarlet Sand Beast and the Fire Kirin, burst into a dazzling golden light. The golden light column shot up into the sky and went straight up to the sky. Almost at this moment, this space was completely illuminated. When Bai Binjia, who was not far away, saw this scene again, her eyes were full of disbelief. Her big watery eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and her eyes were full of confusion. Are you still human? Lin Yu appeared next to Bai Binjia the next second and gently embraced her waist. Survival of the beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Sheng Chong. Chapter 844. Lin Yu whispered in Bai Binjiao's ear. Guess if it's a human or not. Lin Yu was pinned to Bai Binjiao with a smile on his face, and a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Bai Binjiao rolled her eyes after seeing this, and then rolled her eyes at Lin Yu unhappily. You are so unruly. Lin Yu just laughed. The 10,000 snakes lord not far away almost condensed into a small snake from a ball of blood mist in that instant. When Lin Yu saw the scene at this time, he was stunned for a moment, and his eyes and eyebrows were full of disbelief. At this time, Lin Yu didn't dare to believe that the 10,000 snakes lord could still survive after experiencing this. Lin Yu gently touched his chin, and then stared at the 10,000 snakes lord in front of him, with a look of indifference, and a faint breath was completely released at this moment. It seems that you are not dead yet, now I can help you. After hearing what Lin Yu said, the 10,000 snakes lord began to struggle desperately, but at this time he suddenly found that no matter how he struggled, he could not get rid of Lin Yu's restraints. In the end, the 10,000 snakes lord's eyes were full of a faint fear. I was wrong, as long as you let me go, I am willing to be your cow and horse, as a slave, as long as you let me go. At this time, the 10,000 snakes lord's eyes were staring straight at Lin Yu, and then he said so solemnly, his eyes were full of a kind of fear. At this time, after hearing what the 10,000 snakes lord said, Lin Yu also raised a faint smile at the corner of his mouth, and then he waved his hand casually in the next second. The vast aura almost completely condensed from the void at this moment. At this time, the 10,000 snakes lord felt a strong pressure, which was pervasive and began to spread quietly towards his body. At this time, he screamed again and again. Ah 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 ah. The 10,000 snakes lord tried his best and almost gritted his teeth and forced out a few words from his mouth. You will regret it, I swear you will regret it. At this time, the 10,000 snakes lord almost gritted his teeth and said, and the faint aura on his body instantly condensed completely. But even if he tried his best, there was no way to break free from Lin Yu's restraints at this time. The next second, Lin Yu just waved his hand casually. Dust to dust, ashes to ashes, everything should end. As the blood mist exploded, Lin Yu's expression flashed with a rare solemnity. At this moment, the ice goddess, who was not far away, seemed to have noticed the abnormality of Lin Yu. She just felt a strong breath spreading from the original forest. After the ice goddess felt this breath, her expression could not help but calm down. At this time, she gently rubbed her chin, and a little puzzled look flashed in the corners of her eyes and eyebrows. Why don't I remember such a powerful guy following me in? The next second, after a blood mist exploded, the ice goddess smelled the faint smell of blood, and her face instantly turned pale. The ice saint's mind was shaken, and her voice even trembled slightly at this time. How is it possible? This is the divine essence of the 10,000 snake lord. The 10,000 snake lord is a beast in the realm of the God King. Who killed him? This person is probably too scary. After thinking of this, the ice saint's heart trembled slightly. If this person also came for that thing, with my current strength, it is impossible to fight with that guy. The ice saint was like an ant on a hot pot, not knowing what to do next. At this time, after Lin Yu killed the 10,000 snake lord, he calmed down his surging spiritual power, and then a touch of indifference flashed in his expression in the next second. At this time, Lin Yu forced himself to stabilize his mind. I don't know why, at this time, he always felt that in the dark, a faint breath seemed to be constantly pulling his soul. Lin Yu half closed his eyes, and then calmed down a little. What's going on? Why do I feel this way? At this time, Lin Yu scratched his head, his eyes and eyebrows were full of surprise, and a trace of indifference flashed across his expression. At this time, Bai Binjiao turned her head after seeing this scene, and her big watery eyes stared straight at Lin Yu, and then she asked softly. What's wrong? Why do I feel uneasy when I look at you? After Lin Yu heard Bai Binjiao's voice, he came back to his senses in an instant, and then waved his hands casually, with a faint smile on the corner of his mouth. It's nothing, maybe it's just an illusion. When Bai Binjiao heard Lin Yu say this, her eyes were full of confusion. Finally, she glanced in Lin Yu's direction, and there was a slight hint of confusion at the corner of her mouth. Smile. Interesting, I'd like to hear what the illusion is. At this time, Lin Yu saw Bai Binjiao being so unrelenting, so he just leaned down and lowered his head, and then whispered softly in Bai Binjiao's ear. I won't tell you. After Bai Binjiao heard Lin Yu say this, she immediately reached out her hand and grabbed the soft flesh of Lin Yu's waist with quick eyes and hands. Then she saw a faint smile rising from the corner of her mouth. Yeah. Lin Yu suddenly had an ominous premonition, but at this moment, the Bai Binjiao transformer twisted the soft flesh of Lin Yu's waist 360 degrees with such quick eyes and hands. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 845. At this time, 3 black lines appeared on Lin Yu's forehead, and then he begged for mercy one after another. I was wrong, I shouldn't have teased you just now. At this time, Bai Binjiao was staring at Lin Yu with a smile on her face, and then brought up the old things again. What happened just now? I just have a feeling that there seems to be something in the southeast that can touch my blood. As for what kind of thing it is, I can't explain it. After Bai Binjiao heard what Lin Yu said, a faint smile appeared at the corner of her mouth, and then she came to the rescue and said in a deep voice. Anyway, we don't know where to go now. How about we follow the instructions and go to the southeast? After Bai Binjiao finished speaking, she playfully stuck out her tongue at Lin Yu. It was obvious that this little girl didn't care about the dangers around her at all. After Lin Yu finished speaking at this time, he suddenly took a step forward, and finally jumped up. He faced the 2 people in front and Bai Binjiao, so quickly go there. Lin Yu's speed was not slow, but in just a blink of an eye, he was already outside the forest. But at this moment, Lin Yu suddenly stood firm, and then he looked around him up and down, and his whole expression evoked a rare sense of solemnity. His brows seemed to be knitted together. No, there seems to be something wrong with this. At this time, Lin Yu said helplessly, and then his entire face turned slightly pale almost at that moment, and his brows seemed to be knitted together. After Bai Binjiao heard what Lin Yu said, her whole expression was full of surprise, and then her big, watery eyes stared straight at Lin Yu. Body, and then whispered like this. What could possibly go wrong? At this time, Lin Yu thought about it for a moment, and then said softly to Bai Binjiao. Actually, the problem here is probably that there are many time and space nodes here, and each time and space node can actually leave a mark here, so there are multiple layers of time and space here. At this time, Lin Yu just spoke so softly, with a rare dignified look in his eyes, and then he sighed leisurely. After Bai Binjiao heard Lin Yu say this, she felt like a 2-foot-tall monk, completely confused. At this time, Bai Binjiao turned her head and stared at Lin Yu Yu's body, and then he said in a deep voice. I still don't understand something. 3 black lines suddenly appeared on Lin Yu's forehead. At this time, he was naturally speechless for a while. Let me tell you, there are a lot of time and space fragments here. I think I finally understand why I feel that way. It's not for any other reason, but just because the time and space fragments here may have something to do with me before. At this time, Lin Yu thought of this, and then directly summoned the space-time beast. After the space-time beast appeared in front of Lin Yu at this time, it stared straight at Lin Yu, and then there was a hint of helplessness in its expression, and then it said in a deep voice. Well, I want to remind you that there are a lot of time and space fragments here. With my current ability, I can temporarily remove 3 time and space fragments for you to take a look at, but... At this time, the space-time beast paused immediately after saying this. After Lin Yu saw the time and space beast like this, he also felt that the time and space beast was a bit strange. His eyes were fixed on the time and space beast, and then he whispered like this. But what? But I always feel that it's better not to look too closely at some things. The deeper some things are involved, the deeper you will be stuck in this quagmire and it will be difficult to extricate yourself. You'd better think about it carefully when the time comes. At this time, Lin Yu pondered for a moment, and then sighed leisurely. Oh, no matter what, I want to try it. Let's watch the first clip first. Let me start with you from ancient times. After the time and space beasts finished speaking, they immediately gathered in front of Lin Yu. At this time, Lin Yu just felt that his mind was clear and clear for a while, and then the next second he started like this, move forward along the tunnel of space and time. At this time, after seeing this scene, Bai Binjiu on the side just felt that all of this was a bit too magical, and even the magic was a bit unbelievable to her. What on earth is going on? There was also a faint smile on the corner of the space-time beast's mouth, and there was quite a bit of playfulness in his eyes. Some things can't be explained or explained, but sooner or later you will understand. At this time, Lin Yu only felt that he had traveled through time and space. At this time, he was actually sitting in a shop. At this time, Lin Yu began to carefully think about what happened. But at this moment, he looked around and saw a person beside the golden chariot. Chen Chuan's golden chariot stood in the void. The powerful pressure emanating from the golden chariot caused the birds and beasts under his feet to flee. The Gateboy, the Demon King, and the Master of Fengxiang Valley just came to this real continent. Not far away, Chen Chuan was seen, sitting cross-legged on the golden chariot, looking like a young master from a noble family. The Demon King scratched his head. What do you think the master wants us to do this time? What does it mean to come to this real continent to train? The Demon King was confused. The Master of Fengxiang Valley just said leisurely, I guess the master thinks that our realm is not enough, so he asked us to come out to train. The Gateboy just smiled and said nothing. After seeing the 3 of them in the distance, Chen Chuan immediately ordered his followers to drive the golden chariot towards them. The golden chariot stopped in front of them. Chen Chuan looked down on people and said, Who are you guys? Let me ask you if there are any secret treasures around here. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 846. This Chen Chuan looked like a second-generation ancestor, especially the arrogant attitude on his face, which made the Demon Emperor want to slap his size 42 shoes on his size 43 face. The Demon King just snorted coldly, Humph, I think you are a fool, and I don't even think about it. If there is any secret treasure nearby, it will be your turn to find it. The Demon King said coldly. Who is Chen Chuan? He is the direct disciple of the 3rd elder of the Great Wilderness section. Naturally, his level is beyond the reach of this ordinary person. Chen Chuan glanced up and down at the Demon Emperor. What are you talking about? Do you know who I am? At this time, the Demon King couldn't bear it any longer. He suddenly waved his hand and completely released his pressure. Almost at that moment, all the demon beasts nearby were prostrate on the ground. The owner of Fengxiang Valley and the doorman just looked at each other, but did not stop them. After Chen Chuan felt the pressure from the Demon Emperor in front of him, his entire complexion instantly turned livid. He felt his legs go weak, and then he fell to his knees on the ground. The Demon King glanced back and forth at Chen Chuan. How? Do you have anything else to say? This Chen Chuan is also a person who understands current affairs, so at this moment, he quickly shook his head. I was ignorant just now and bumped into the gentleman. I hope you will forgive me. But I don't know what the hell these gentlemen are doing here this time. At this time, according to the Demon Emperor's temperament, he was not prepared to accept Chen Chuan's apology. At this time, the Demon Emperor was ready to kill him, but was stopped by the doorman. I kind of know why Master asked you to come here to practice this time. There is no other reason, but it's just because you are cruel by nature. Master once taught us that we must be kind to others, you understand. The Demon Emperor's hand that was still in mid-air fell instantly, and there was a bit of respect in his expression. You are right. Chen Chuan's heart also stirred up a storm. You must know that the person in front of him is probably not much better than his master. To be able to become this person's master, his cultivation level has probably reached a level that he can't. To the point of imagination. The king of humans, outside the restricted area of Dongxian, inside the creation restaurant. Lin Yu suddenly sneezed and rubbed his nose. I wonder which little brat is talking bad about me again. But at this moment, I saw a woman walking in outside the door. This woman was extremely beautiful, with a pair of willow leaf eyebrows, a pair of red and phoenix eyes, and a slender waist that couldn't be held tightly. She seemed to be like that. The fairy comes out of the painting. But unfortunately, the woman's face was rather sickly pale, and her aura was also slightly weak. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he immediately walked to the woman's side. Lin Yu just waved his hand casually, and the woman felt a majestic aura spreading in her chest, and then the woman's face actually looked much better. Nalan Rongruo raised his head and looked back and forth at Lin Yu, and then a hint of gratitude flashed in his eyes. Little girl Nalan Rongruo, I have met Mr. After Lin Yu heard what Nalan Rongruo said, he just waved his hand casually. How did you find me here? At this time, Nalan Rongruo plopped down and knelt down in front of Lin Yu. Please sir, save my sect. Lin Yu gently rubbed his chin, and then coughed lightly. Ahem, if I guessed correctly, you should be a member of the Real Continent's Eternal Divine Sect. At this time, Lin Yu just spoke leisurely and unhurriedly. After Nalan Rongruo heard what Lin Yu said, he nodded like a chicken pecking at rice. Sir, you are indeed a gentleman. I haven't even announced my family status, but you have already guessed it out. Lin Yu just pinched his fingers and calculated, and then a look of embarrassment appeared on his face. Alas, actually I'm afraid I really can't help you with this matter. Our fate has not yet come, and if I insist on helping you now, I'm afraid it will destroy my foundation. Lin Yu raised his head and looked at Nalan Rongruo helplessly. At this time, after Nalan Rongruo heard what Lin Yu said, there were tears in his eyes. His eyes were filled with autumn water, and he looked even more pitiful. Sir, please let me beg you. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he also sighed softly. Well, the way of heaven is impermanent, but the way of humanity has its own destiny. It is the destiny of heaven and earth. You can't compete with this world. You are also a Taoist, so you should know it. At this time, Nalan Rongruo gritted his teeth, and then hugged Lin Yu directly. Sir, as long as you can save my sect, no matter what conditions you put forward, I will agree. At this time, Lin Yu felt a bit soft, but in the next second, Lin Yu had already appeared 3 feet away from Nalan Rongruo. Nalan Rongruo didn't notice at all how Lin Yu broke out of his arms, and he was stunned for a moment. At this moment, Nalan Rongruo was thinking in his mind, this man's cultivation is indeed worthy of his reputation and unfathomable. If he is willing to help, then our sect will have nothing to worry about. Miss, please respect yourself. I just said this. It's not that I won't take action, but the time has not come yet. At this time, Lin Yu was in a state of confusion. At this time, he felt that he was himself, and he was not himself. At this time, He only felt that his head was splitting. In addition, he had no idea what the so-called real continent was. At this time, Lin Yu was lying on the ground with his head covered, rolling back and forth, and screaming in pain. There was a sense of helplessness between his eyebrows. At this moment, the scene around him changed instantly and returned to reality in the next second. At this time, the space-time beast turned his head and looked at Lin Yu. His face froze, and then he said in a low voice, "What did you see just now?" Lin Yu told the space-time beast everything he had seen before. At this time, after hearing what Lin Yu said, the space-time beast's expression showed a rare solemnity. His face sank, and then he gently touched his chin. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 847. No, I still feel that these places should be related in some way. What I saw before was a person in the creation restaurant. That person's strength is unfathomable. He might be able to reach the ancestor level. At this time, Lin Yu's expression flashed with some complexity. He just frowned slightly, and then a faint bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. After seeing this scene, the space-time beast couldn't help but turn his head, glanced back and forth at Lin Yu, and then said in a deep voice, "You said now, do you want to continue reading? Now you only have 2 chances left. You only have 2 fragments, so you can continue reading." After Bai Binjiao saw this scene, she turned her head and glanced back and forth at Lin Yu, and then couldn't help but shake her head. "Don't read it, it's best not to read it." After Lin Yu heard Bai Binjiao say this, he gently rubbed Bai Binjiao's little head, and then a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Look, you still have to look. Let me take a look." After Lin Yu finished speaking, his mind couldn't help but twist slightly, and then his whole soul completely detached almost at that moment. At this time, he came to a battlefield, but at this time he seemed to be outside it. He looked at the scene in front of him, with countless people falling, but he felt a little desolate. Suddenly, Lin Yu saw a ghost-like person not far away, walking around like this. Tang Xiao's figure is like a ghost, his moves are like the autumn wind, his quick kills are a bit ruthless, and he kills with extraordinary decisiveness. At this time, Bai Lianzuo was definitely no match for Tang Xiao. After retreating for a long time, he forcibly stabilized his body, and then others heard him shout angrily, "Boy, that's a bit too much of a bully. Just give me a try." After Zhou Shibalian finished speaking, he forcibly poured 30% of his energy and blood into the long sword at his waist, and then guided the long sword towards Tang Xiao's face. This sword wave spread across the river for 3,000 miles, and everyone around saw the sword coming up from the Tianmen. The sword that the White Lotus left envoy used his own energy and blood to move was quite capable. Tang Xiao just snorted coldly, "The mantis is blocking the car." Then he saw Tang Xiao throwing out 19 daggers from his waist. Those 19 daggers were tempered with 19 kinds of strange poisons. In just a blink of an eye, the 19 daggers bypassed the sword energy and pierced straight towards the face of the White Lotus envoy. The Bailianzuo envoy roared angrily. "The sky cuts off Kang Huang with one sword. In the face of absolute power, you are just vain." After Zhou Shibalian finished speaking, he burned 20% of his blood essence again, preparing to forcibly replace Tang Xiao at the cost of his serious injuries. After seeing this scene, the right envoy Bailian in the distance just felt that the left envoy Bailian might have spent a lot of money this time. Zhang Xiaojing also realized that Tang Xiao was in danger. "Hide quickly. You know, this is a sword that Bai Lianzuo used half of his life to trade. How could it be so easy for Tang Xiao to hide from it?" Tang Xiao clenched his fists and said through gritted teeth, "Damn it, why are you working so hard?" But now it was too late for Tang Xiao to hide even if he wanted to. That flying sword came towards me and knocked down all 19 daggers. Seeing that this sword was inescapable and inescapable, Tang Xiao seemed to be afraid of danger. Redfield City. Zhang Lingyu glanced at the beauty beside his pillow and just gently played with her hair. Suddenly, an ominous premonition came to my mind. Zhang Lingyu's face turned cold, and then he took a deep breath. Oops. At this time, Zhang Lingyu stood up suddenly, and then immediately activated the Green Lotus Sword, and then waved it lightly in front of him. The Green Lotus Sword went straight into the 9 heavens, like the setting sun in the sky. One sword slashed Jushin he angrily. That sword shot straight into the sky, and in just a blink of an eye, it had already landed on Jiangnan Road. Tang Xiao originally felt that there was no hope of survival and had already closed his eyes. Bai Lian's left envoy and Bai Lian's right envoy felt that they had a chance to win, and their expressions were indifferent. But a sword was stabbed directly from the 9 heavens. The sword was in front of Tang Xiao. The sword energy rose into the sky and completely shattered the sword energy. The sword energy in the sky knocked Su Deifo and Bai Lian to their left. The fate of the two of them was completely cut off. The two of them just felt uneasy for a while, and then they covered their chests and spurted out a mouthful of blood. At this time, the two of them stamped their feet and beat their chests. I didn't expect that the majestic emperor would have such despicable methods, and he doesn't care about his status. Tang Xiao's gloomy eyes suddenly ignited with hope. He just waved his hand gently, and then 2 silver needles accurately pierced the shoulders of the White Lotus left envoy and the White Lotus envoy right. At this moment, Tang Xiao wanted to take action again, but was directly repelled by a turbid aura. Tang Xiao retreated behind him for a long time, and then a mouthful of blood spurted out. Somewhere, a man wearing Taoist robe slowly opened his eyes. That person finally took action. Sun En knelt down in front of the man. Greetings to Master, I wonder what Master will do this time. The man nodded slightly. There is some breakthrough, but after all, it is still a few points behind. Sun En slowly took a few steps back. But half a step to the pinnacle of land gods. The man nodded slightly, and then closed his eyes. Those 2 of your apprentices should go back and take a look. Sun En knelt on the ground. Disciple, I obey. White Lotus Sect. Reporting to the throne, Bai Lian's left envoy and Bai Lian's right envoy are poisoned by a strange poison. I wonder if they can be rescued on that Jiangnan road. Yang Zheng took a deep breath. The army failed to win. Alas, Zhang Han is ordered to go to the rescue, but remember not to fall in love with fighting. The guard below nodded solemnly, and then retreated respectfully. Yang Zheng glanced in the direction of Hongyi City, and then clenched his fists. Zhang Lingyu, even if he is as strong as Dai and you, he is just a stepping stone on my road to success. Redfield City. Zhang Lingyu sneezed heavily and then rubbed his nose. Aji, I don't know which bastard is saying bad things about me, I deserve to die. Wu Meyer carefully covered Zhang Lingyu with a quilt, and then stood there, staring at Zhang Lingyu with a smile. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 848. I didn't expect that this great master of the God King realm would actually get sick. Zhang Lingyu just gently lifted Wu Meier's chin. You will know in a moment that this master of the God King realm will not only get sick, but also do other things. Wu Meier was shy and turned her head away, just begging for mercy. At this moment, Lin Yu, who was standing by, saw this scene and felt his mind tremble slightly, and then his eyes and eyebrows were full of a strange look. At this moment, he felt the god of time and space, a powerful and irresistible force, which instantly entangled him. At this moment, he only felt his mind tremble, and then the next second he was directly pulled away by that powerful force. At this time, Lin Yu returned to his consciousness again, and at this time, his whole face was full of surprise. Lin Yu's expression froze, and then he gasped for air, with a look of shock in his eyes and eyebrows. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu's face flashed with a rare solemnity, and then a bit of helplessness flashed between his eyebrows. How is it possible? What does this mean? The time-space beast looked at Lin Yu's slightly pale face, and then turned his head. He looked at Lin Yu back and forth, and he just said this softly. I think you'd better not continue to look at it now, otherwise you will die. At this time, Lin Yu shook his head, turned his head and looked at the time-space beast again, and then his expression was full of determination. No, I want to watch, I want to continue watching, give me the last fragment. After seeing the firmness in Lin Yu's eyes, the space-time beast felt helpless. Bai Binjiu held Lin Yu's hand and stared at Lin Yu. No, don't go on. If you go on, you will die. Lin Yu ignored Bai Binjiu and just turned his head to look at the space-time beast. The space-time beast also knew that it was useless to persuade Lin Yu now. At this time, he just waved his hand casually, and then he saw a distant and vast breath rushing towards Lin Yu. That vast breath instantly wrapped Lin Yu completely. The next second, Lin Yu saw that he was actually in a dark and lightless place. At this time, Lin Yu suddenly found that the clothes on his body were even a little strange. Lin Yu suddenly remembered that these clothes were the clothes of the time and space he was in before. He thought he had returned to the original time and space, and his face was full of joy. Ha ha ha, great, I'm finally back, I'm finally back. At this time, several people walked over slowly, and then they had a little panic on their faces, and their eyes were staring at Lin Yu. Oh no, an unknown area was found in front. What's going on? Lin Yu was also confused at this time, and he didn't know why. This may not be an ordinary ruins, the doctor said in a deep voice. Yes, this is indeed not an ordinary ruins. It should have been formed before the explosion of this ancient civilization. Looking at the current situation, it should be at least a level 4 ruins. A cold voice suddenly came from behind them, followed by the sound of high heels hitting the ground. The voice was full of rhythm and melody, and everyone could not help but look towards that person, and slowly looked over. Lin Yu did the same. At this time, a tall and beautiful woman was seen walking slowly from the cabin. Goddess Suwire. Why are you here? My Highness. Brandon exclaimed. The man's eyes showed a light blue, as deep as the sea, with a head of golden hair casually scattered on his shoulders, and a curvy figure, especially the deep ravine in front of his body, which made people unable to stop. Almost the moment Suwire appeared, everyone's eyes were fixed on Suwire. But only Lin Yu's expression did not change. Suwire looked at the man in front of him who had little interest in him. He was a standard Oriental man, not tall and straight, but his eyes were deep enough. Especially the pair of eyes seemed like the endless abyss. Su Wei came directly in front of Lin Yu and stretched out a white and tender little hand. The blood on the hand was clearly visible, just like a touch of white snow. Hello, my name is Suwire. The people around, especially Brandon and Mark, seemed to have fallen on the deck. Because before this, the goddess Suwire had never been so enthusiastic to anyone. Lin Yu was not shy. He directly extended his left hand, then shook hands with the goddess Su Wei, and then quickly withdrew. Hello, my name is Lin Yu. You are very interesting. I rarely see men from the East, especially such young and promising men from the East like you. You are so young, but you can actually be the captain of the interstellar fleet. It is really extraordinary. Really? That's because you haven't felt the charm of the ancient Eastern country. If I have time, I can take you with me. As long as you penetrate the barrier of time and space, although there will be a very short space and time, even if that time is less than 1/10,000th of a millisecond, if you use your high-speed spaceship to accelerate forward, you will definitely be able to get through before the barrier of time and space closes. Lin Yu rubbed his chin, looking completely eager to fight. But at this moment, a violent tremor suddenly came over, and the goddess Suwire was unstable and instantly fell into Lin Yu's arms. Lin Yu just felt a touch of tenderness, and at this moment he couldn't help but feel distracted and happy. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji-Sheng Chang. Chapter 849. After seeing this scene, Su Wei couldn't help but have a blush on his pretty face. At this time, Su Wei quickly got up. Mark and Brandon were standing by. After seeing this scene, their admiration and envy for Lin Yu reached an unbearable level. Lin Yu looked very calm. What is going on? Such a large fleet should not be trembling like this at all. At this moment, Brandon frowned. Oh no, it looks a bit tricky now. I don't know who has invaded our control computer. Now the main control room has completely lost control. Everyone knows that losing control is tantamount to death in this universe, because the next spacecraft will not be restricted by oneself, and if the spacecraft hits the black hole, it will be destroyed. Just when everyone was thinking about how to deal with this matter, a man wearing a mask and armor suddenly appeared on the big screen in the control room. First of all, I would like to apologize for intruding you in such a presumptuous manner. The man said coldly, with an ugly look on his face. At this moment, after everyone heard the man's voice, they all raised their heads and stared at the man. Who are you? Brandon snapped. We are the subordinates of the Dark Throne. I am the Dark Knight. The Dark Throne is preparing to welcome back our princess, so please don't be ignorant. At this time, everyone looked at each other because they had no idea who the princess in front of them was. What do you mean? Who is the princess you are talking about? Your Highness Suver, you shouldn't have told these lower races your true identity. After hearing that voice, Goddess Suvel's face turned slightly ugly. Zero, that's enough. This matter has nothing to do with them, let them go. At this time, while the two of them were having a conversation, Lin Yu unfolded his own microcomputer. The microcomputer tied to Lin Yu's arm seemed to have slipped through the net, and became the only electronic device that could be used today. Equipment. Lin Yu used his fleet to frantically search for any suspicious spacecraft in front of him, because there was probably no one other than invisible spacecraft that could approach the aircraft carrier so silently. If he wanted to solve the current dilemma, pointing at the so-called Dark Knight Zero and showing mercy would not work. He had to find the location of the spaceship. Lin Yu first used electromagnetic waves to interfere with the signal. After strengthening the signal of the spacecraft, Lin Yu discovered the spacecraft at a position 325 million light-years away from him in the vast galaxy. At the end, a faint smile appeared on Lin Yu's lips. That's right, it's right here. Lin Yu used his quantum laser cannon to set the position, and then he clicked it. The quantum laser cannon fired a beam of alpha energy particles, which crazily attacked the spacecraft where the meat was. And at this moment, with that burst of annihilation, Lin Yubian returned again. At this time, Lin Yu began to think about the scene he had seen before. At this time, he tried his best to deduce why he had experienced what he had experienced before. But at this time, he wanted to push through all this no matter what. Everything is unknown. Lin Yu shook his head desperately, and then he clenched his fists. At this time, he almost said through gritted teeth. Damn it, why is it like this? Why is it like this? At this time, Lin Yu was obviously a bit hysterical. Everyone's eyes were focused on Lin Yu at the same time. A bit of confusion flashed in their eyes, and then they became so serious. Said loudly. What happened? What did you see again? At this time, there was quite a bit of concern in the eyes of the space-time beast. After all, not everyone can observe the fragments of time and space. If you want to observe the fragments of time and space, you must have an extremely powerful soul. However, although Lin Yu's soul was extremely powerful, he was still in a trance after looking at the three space-time fragments. At this moment, before Lin Yu could say anything, there was a powerful tremor around him, and then he saw a divine path suddenly appearing in front of him. On both sides of that road, there is a very high wall. At this time, Lin Yu suddenly felt more psychic. At this time, a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and he slowly walked forward bit by bit. I understand, let's go first. We may be getting closer to the truth. At this time, the space-time beast and Bai Binjai were there. After seeing this scene, the two of them just felt that they were a little crazy in the rain. Bai Binjai turned around, stared directly at Lin Yu, and then touched Lin Yu's head thoughtfully. I don't have a fever either. Why are you talking nonsense? Lin Yu heard this. After Bai Binjai said this, 3 black lines appeared on his forehead instantly. He was speechless in his heart. He just said this in a deep voice. What do you know? I tell you, what I just saw is related to the murals on both sides, because I just saw a very familiar mural. As long as we use this mural, we may be able to piece together the time and space fragments I saw before. Bai Binjai and the space-time beast heard this. After Lin Yu said this, they looked at each other at that time, and then nodded gently. In this case, then okay, let's do as you said, let's go in first. Lin Yu also nodded gently, and then he walked slowly inside with them. At this time, the first mural turned into a golden chariot, and what happened afterwards was exactly the same as what Lin Yu experienced, without any difference. But at the very end, the woman Lin Yu had seen before and the guy Lin Yu was possessed by at that time, together resisted a world catastrophe, and after that catastrophe, this turbulent situation was formed, and years of war occurred. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 850. After sorting it out like this, Lin Yu suddenly became enlightened, and then he immediately told all these things about the space-time beast and Bai Binjai. The time beast and Bai Binjai also nodded lightly after hearing what Lin Yu said. They turned their heads and looked at Lin Yu, with a bit more complexity in their expressions. So that's what I said. Continuing to walk down, Lin Yu saw frequent wars around him. In the end, the man he saw unified the world. After that man unified the world, technological power developed rapidly, so in the end, the world was formed. The situation before. When Lin Yu saw this, he actually felt empty in his heart. At this time, Lin Yu also sighed softly. When Bai Binjai saw Lin Yu, she felt a little strange after sighing. She turned her head and glanced at Lin Yu, and then whispered like this. What's wrong? Looking at you looking worried, what happened? After Lin Yu heard what Bai Binjai said, a wry smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. It's nothing, I just feel a little homesick. At this time, Bai Binjai really didn't know what to say for a while. After she recovered for a while, she softly comforted her. It doesn't matter. After we leave this ghost place, how about we go to your house together? At this moment, Bai Binjai's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and then she smiled. At this time, Lin Yu suddenly felt a warm current in his heart. He glanced at Bai Binjai, with a trace of complicated meaning flashing in his eyes. At this time, Bai Binjai's expression was somewhat complicated. After seeing this scene, the space-time beast on the side suddenly had 3 black lines on his forehead, and he was speechless for a while. His beautiful wife glanced at the two of them coldly, and then followed. Then he coughed lightly. Ahem, I said the two of you are almost fine. Don't go too far, okay? After Lin Yu and Bai Binjai saw the time and space beast like this, they couldn't help but smile at each other. Lin Yu's lips also evoked a faint smile, and then they continued like this, gently rubbing his chin. He pinned the space-time beast with a smile on his face. Don't be like that. I'm just joking with you. 3 black lines appeared on the space-time beast's forehead, and he was naturally speechless for a while. At this time, the few of them continued to walk forward. When they were approaching the end, they discovered that the person from before had actually embarked on a road to eternal life. And the story ended abruptly at the end. After thinking of this, Lin Yu's eyes flashed with rare solemnity. At this time, she couldn't help but shook her head, and then turned her head towards the space-time beast. Take a look. After seeing this scene, the time and space beast's expression became a little more solemn. He frowned slightly, and then said in a deep voice, I always feel that there is something strange about this matter, but as for what is weird, I can't figure it out for the moment. At this time, the space-time beast just said in a cold voice, and then turned his head and stared directly at Lin Yu. After Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, he just pondered for a moment, and then a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. I do feel that there is something strange about this, but as for what is strange, I can't explain it. I always feel that the guy I saw leaning over him before must have died. If not, if so, why would such relics be left behind? Lin Yu had this look on his face, staring at the time and space beast with a smile. After hearing what Lin Yu said, the time and space beast nodded slightly. At this time, the two of them looked at each other and smiled in tacit understanding. Bai Binjiao, who was on the side, was naturally confused for a while after seeing the two of them like this. After waiting for a while, they took a few steps forward. At this time, Lin Yu suddenly stood still, and then heard him say in a cold voice, Since you have already arrived, why bother to hide and shrink away all the time? Now show up quickly. Lin Yu just said in a deep voice, and then a faint murderous look flashed in his eyes. At this time, a woman slowly revealed her figure. The woman's eyes were a little more complicated, and then others stared at Lin Yu with a smile. Interesting, it's really interesting. At this time, Lin Yu turned his head, glanced back and forth at the woman, and then said in a deep voice, Who are you? After the woman heard what Lin Yu said, a faint smile appeared at the corner of her mouth, and then she spoke leisurely. I am the Ice Goddess, the saint of the Ice tribe. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what the Ice Goddess said, a trace of indifference flashed across his expression, and then a faint sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. Ice Goddess, forget it, it's better to go back to where you came from. At this time, after hearing what Lin Yu said, the Ice Goddess's face flashed with a hint of gloom, and then he saw the Ice Goddess suddenly take a step forward. The murderous aura in his body began to gradually spread. This is not your home, I can also walk through this Shinto. At this time, the Ice Goddess's eyes were staring at Lin Yu with no intention of giving in. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he also shook his head helplessly. The corners of his mouth naturally aroused. Gave a wry smile. Why are you doing this? I advise you to leave as soon as possible. Otherwise, I'm afraid you will get into trouble again. After the Ice Goddess saw this scene, a faint murderous look flashed in her eyes, and then she clenched her fists and said almost through gritted teeth,